So hi everyone, welcome to our second Ag Justice webinar of 2019. The Ag Justice webinars are usually an exclusive benefit offered by the Organization of Competitive Markets for OCM associate and individual members. Our other membership benefits include staff availabilities, action toolkits, newsletter, and a soon-to-come Trustbusters weekly Ag Monopoly News Roundup. Our fights include CRUEL, the fight to break the corporate stranglehold on the farm-to-institution market, checkoff reform, and a legislation that would put a freeze on any further mega mergers and acquisitions in our farm and food systems. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me if you'd like to learn more about our membership or about our campaigns. Just some logistics. I have muted everyone for now just so that the sound can come out better during the presentations, and we'll unmute everyone during the question part. The Ag Justice webinars that OCM is hosting, they touch on a variety of aspects of the fight for independent family agriculture and give you the tools to understand and stay up to date with the work done within our movement, as well as how to better participate in the fight to break up the corporate stranglehold on our farm and food markets. Our last Ag Justice webinar was we hosted Dr. Mary Hendrickson and Dr. James Harvey as they presented their latest research on the fair agricultural markets. Today, exceptionally, we are excited to open up the webinar past just our membership to some of our close allies, and we welcome Abril Castro and Zoe Willingham. Joe, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. One, I want to thank those, Zoe and Abril, for joining today. I want to thank all those that are on today. This is being recorded and will also be available through our archives and in our outreach to our membership. The Organization for Competitive Markets mission is that we work for transparent, fair, and truly competitive markets, both agriculture and food. To achieve this, OCM fully understands that the only way that America is great is when everyone has the opportunity to share in the prosperity of America based upon their hard work and investment. We believe that it's only through a shared prosperity that opportunity that provides opportunity for hope in America. So we believe in an inclusive economy, an economy that accepts that the capitalist system can deliver the greatest opportunity for shared prosperity, but that it must be bridled. We believe that that is government's role, that government has a responsibility to establish the rules and to be the referee within the market. Paramount in that is to ensure, as our mission statement says, is that all markets operate fairly to all of those who participate in the building of prosperity in America, and that they have an equal opportunity for that shared prosperity. So today, we've been delighted to work with CAP over the past several years. We have participated in their stakeholder calls. They have listened to us as it relates to our experience, our organization's experience, our members' experience, and here recently they have established 2 papers that they have released. The one that is leading today's conversation, I also want to thank our board member, Webb Davis, for his participation. He participated in reviewing and some of the facts that originally established OCM's position. Our board member, Webb Davis, helped participate in, and I know he's joining us today here on this webinar. So with that, I'd like to take an opportunity to introduce those that are here with us today. First, I believe, is Zoe Willingham, and Zoe is a research assistant for the Economic Policy Team at the Center for American Progress, that's CAP. She supports work on farm policy, antitrust law, and economic development. She studied public policy at Duke University and has previously worked at Unite Here, SEIU, and the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions. She's from Chico, California, which is the home of one of the largest farmers markets, and we welcome her and thank her for her hard work throughout delivering these two reports. Abril Castro is a research assistant for race and ethnicity policy at American Progress. Her work focuses on racial wealth gap and the way racism impacts wealth and opportunity for people of color. She studied political science at George Washington University and has previously worked for the Democratic Attorney General's Association, the League of United Latin American Citizens, the Aspen Institute, and spent the majority of her youth in emerging Latino community in Lawrenceville, Georgia. So with that, I will turn it over to the experts and thank them once again for being on the webinar and for their presentations.
Report of its kind about black farmers and the structural racism that impacts their ability to compete on a level playing field even to today.
Of course. Well, again, thank you for having me. My name is Abril Castro, and we are very excited to be doing this presentation. Before we begin, I wanted to talk about what all of these words mean, right? So systemic racism, when I say that, I'm referring to the public policies, institutional practices, and cultural norms that all work together to reinforce racial group inequity. When I say systemic racism, it identifies dimensions of our history, culture, and such that have allowed privileges associated with being white, and it has also disadvantaged privileges aspects associated being with a person of color. In this case, we are referring to black farmers. When I say systemic racism, it's not individual actions, but a feature of the social, economic, and political system that have evolved over time and still impact us today. The goal of this report, which is titled Progressive Governance Can Turn the Tide for Black Farmers, is to highlight how USDA policies from back then continue to impact the ability for black farmers to compete today, and how USDA policies combined with congressional legislation and local norms have brought us to where we are today.
So I believe we can click the slides from our screen, or
there you go. Thank you, Catherine. So before we really dive in, let's paint how the picture looks like today. The USDA released its 2017 numbers a couple of weeks ago, and as of 2017, only 1.52% of farms were operated by black farmers. This is a drastic drop from 1910, when black Americans made up 14% of U.S. farmers. I will note, at the time the USDA was not it had not taken such an active role in farm policy. That really began under the New Deal. Next slide. Okay, and this is a chart from our report. Our report was released before the 2017 numbers. So up until 2017, through the 90s through 2012, we saw that there was a slight increase in black farming. But we did see in 2017 that the numbers did go down. In 2012, black farmers made up 1.58% of U.S. farmers, and in 2017, the numbers went down to 1.52% of farmers. So although the drop was small, it's still telling us that there is more work that needs to be done. Next slide. Thank you. So this report will focus on the USDA policies that have virtually eliminated black farmers. There were, however, a number of private actions that got us to where we are today. White landowners often didn't want to sell their land to black farmers, or if they did, it was at a more expensive price. So during that time in the early 1900s, a lot of black farmers were actually sharecroppers and tenant farmers. farmers. This is important because when you look at the way that a lot of USDA programs were set up, they were more geared toward helping landowners who were more likely to be white than the black sharecroppers and tenant farmers. Excuse me. The Agricultural Adjustment Act was created in 1933 to help stabilize commodity prices by reducing production. So the federal government provided rental and benefit payments to those farmers who withdrew acreage. The way that this program hurt black farmers was that there were few provisions put in place to make sure that the sharecroppers who were working the land actually received those benefit payments. During that time, there were a large percentage of black farmers who were illiterate, right? And this is due to the pervasive legacy of slavery. Not too long before this program was enacted, it was illegal to teach African Americans and slaves to read. So it all connects as to why black farmers were more likely to be illiterate. The fact that they were more likely to be illiterate is what allowed white landowners to exploit this relationship and not give them the benefit payments that were due. The USDA's Cooperative Extension Service was created in 1914. The goal of this program was to help the USDA work with farm communities to increase acreage, provide farm management practice, and really help farmers build skills that are needed to maintain farms. This program was actually instituted in a segregated basis. That means there were white extension service workers to help white farmers, and there were black extension service workers to help black farmers. During this time, like I said, the majority of farmers were tenant farmers and sharecroppers. So if your white landowner didn't want the black extension service workers to come onto this land, there was no way that these black farmers could get access to these services. It was assumed that the extension service could help black farmers through the white landowner who could help them, but because of the inherent inequality with this relationship, there was no guarantee or protection to make sure that black farmers were getting the help that they needed through this program. The last one that I have listed here is the Federal Emergency Relief Administration. This program was created to give support to struggling farmers to deal with any emergencies. However, numbers from 1934 tell us that this program was not targeted. A disproportionate amount of loans went to white farmers, even though they had a higher average income than black farmers. I have two examples. In 1934, in Georgia, black farmers in Greene County received less than 20% less direct relief than white farmers, even though in this county, the average rural white family earned twice the amount of a black farm family. In Macon County, Georgia, whites received double the amount of the direct relief as black farmers, even though white income was 3 times that of black farmers. So although white farmers in this case were more better off compared to black farmers, they got more aid than black farmers. And although these 3 programs were instituted in the early 1900s, discrepancies in loan payments continued as recently as the 1990s. The average loan processing time for black farmers was 220 days compared to 60 days for whites. So that large gap meant that black farmers had less time to buy their seeds, plant their crop, and really get the same investment from their land than white farmers. The fact that these discrepancies lasted for close to a century means that the pervasiveness of the issue needs to be addressed, and USDA policy needs to make sure that they are targeting black farmers in their programs. Next slide. So there has been recent progress that we think has the potential to help black farmers. The 2002 Farm Bill required the USDA to conduct meaningful outreach to disadvantaged farmers, to socially socially disadvantaged farmers. Excuse me. The 2008 Farm Bill strengthened this mandate by creating the USDA Office of Advocacy and Research. So although this program didn't name Black farmers in its name, it's assumed that Black farmers would benefit from this program. Additionally, the 2018 Farm Bill included an heirs property provision. For the first time, heirs property was eligible for a farm number, which means that they were eligible for farm programs such as subsidies and insurance. About 40% of land owned by African Americans is heirs property, so we are confident that this provision would help Black farmers. Next slide. Oh, sorry, no, I'm sorry, continue. Or, sorry, stay on this slide. We do know that there is still more work to be done. There is the case of the Provost family in Louisiana. They are a family of sugarcane farmers who have suffered discrimination, fraud, and vandalism after they sued the First Guarantee Bank. They also allege that the USDA has denied them the necessary crop loans to be able to grow their sugarcane, which has forced them into foreclosure. Additionally, as recently as late April, the president of the Black Farmers Association, John Boyd, he said that he always sells his soybeans through his white father-in-law to make sure that he doesn't lose profits, because he knows if he sells them, he won't get as much money. And the fact that, you have these two instances of families needing to jump through hoops to get the same return on investment means that there's still more work to be done to ensure that all farmers have an equal chance to equitable outcomes in farming.
Great, thank you, Abril.
Yeah.
In addition to researching the historical roots of structural racism at the USDA and the way that that still impacts Black farmers to this day, we also worked on formulating and putting forth some policy solutions that will help begin to rebuild Black land ownership, Black farms, and as a result, Black wealth. Our policy solutions are coming into four main parts, as you can see on the next slide. We aim to expand access to land for Black farmers, preserve existing Black-owned land and farms, expand grants and technical support to Black farmers, and institute strict oversight of the USDA to ensure that it is treating people equitably. So to expand access to land, as you'll see on the next slide, thank you, we propose creating a public land trust. Now, 70% of America's farmland is going to change hands in approximately 10 years because farmers, on average, are getting older and are likely to pass on, either sell their land or pass it on to the next generation through their family. So what we propose is the creation of a public land trust that provides an option to farmers looking to sell their land to sell to the U.S. government with probably some sort of public incentive attached to it, maybe a tax incentive. And the land would be held by the government and conserved, and also in some cases restored if that's necessary, and made available for purchase by beginning Black farmers, because farmland is becoming incredibly expensive. You have cases of foreign companies investing in U.S. land, and we want to make sure that the next generation of American farmers, particularly farmers that historically have been excluded from farming, have an opportunity to enter agriculture and make a living for themselves and build wealth. Secondly, we want to protect existing Black land and Black farms, chiefly through the protection of heirs property. Currently, there are state level policies that protect heirs property from forced partition sales. It's called the Uniform Protection of Heirs Property Act, but there is no federal law that prevents forced partition sales. So For a little bit of background, heirs property is property that is held without a formal title or deed, and it's passed down from generation to generation without any formal documentation. In this case, the land is owned by the heirs, the children, but it's not actually divided. It's that the children have an equal share in the land parcel as a whole. So the acreage itself is not divided amongst the heirs. And this becomes a problem because what has been occurring is real estate developers in some areas have been preying on families who own heirs property and trying to convince one member to sell the whole plot of land over the objections of the rest of the family. In that case, it goes before a judge that decides whether to force a sale or not. So what a uniform protection of heirs property law does is it requires the judge to consider the cultural and historical value of the land, and also heed the wishes of the people who are currently living on or working the land. Moreover, it requires that the land be posted for sale publicly, instead of being sold on like a private bid from a real estate developer, because what has occurred in some cases is that the land isn't properly evaluated, and it's sold for well below its value. So not only does the family lose its ancestral home, but they're not even getting market price. So passing a federal law protecting heirs property from forced partition sales is absolutely crucial. In addition to protecting heirs property, the USDA should create a task force that will provide legal support to help current black farms have wills that will protect the integrity of the farm as families prepare to pass it on to the next generation. Thirdly, we propose supporting existing technical support programs. Historically, black farmers have not had equal access to the technical support and outreach programs that the USDA has run. So what we propose is expanding current 2501 programs, as they're called, and create additional programs that specifically address the needs of black farmers. Moreover, we propose the creation of a task force to study the challenges and needs of black farmers specifically, because it's not going to be the same as your typical farmer. They have different needs because of the unique history that Abril outlined. Finally, we need to get to the root of things by holding the USDA accountable for its discriminatory behavior and make sure that it comes to an end. That's why we propose submitting the USDA to regular oversight by the Government Accountability Office, which would be an outside auditor that would monitor the way that they administer programs to ensure that, say, loan processing time does not vary but on account of race, and that farmers are receiving, equitable loans and equitable access to USDA programs. We propose that the top-line data from that would be published so that citizens and farmers can monitor the progress of the USDA. So this would be no microdata would be made public. It would just compare, say, the FSA loan processing times by race. And we also propose creating an online civil rights complaint database similar to that of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which allows consumers to submit complaints online easily. Great. Well, thank you so much. We're going to turn over to our second paper on the topic of farm policy. This has been in the works for a long time, as CAP has been has been learning a lot from Joe Maxwell and the rest of the folks at OCM. My boss, Andy Green, has gone to your conferences for the last couple of years, and that's inspired our team, the economic policy team, to take a deeper dive into the issue of market concentration and how it impacts farmers. So this is the second report that we published in the last 2 months on farm policy. So I don't want to spend too much time telling you all what you already know and experience every day, and that is that, you know, abusive agribusiness monopolies are hurting farmers, suppressing and manipulating commodity prices, jacking up input prices. You folks live and breathe that every day and know better than anyone the impact that corporate concentration has on the way that American farmers do business. So what I'll do is I'll focus on the policy solutions that we put forth at the end, and just sort of cut to the chase. So I think that's going to be slide slide 18. Great. So at CAP, we're very excited that corporate concentration in agriculture is getting more attention these days, especially by like high-profile policymakers who've been traveling around Iowa and talking to folks on the ground. And we're very encouraged by that and the recent reintroduction of the agribusiness merger moratorium yesterday by Senator John Tester and Senator Booker. We go beyond antitrust law, however, in trying to level the playing field for farmers. So in addition to reining in corporate power, we want to empower farmers to bargain for a better deal, because bargaining power is relative, right? And you have very powerful corporations, and comparatively, you know, farmers who are atomized, who might be isolated, you don't have the ability to negotiate on the same level with these businesses. So in addition to countering their power, we want to empower farmers to get a better deal. We also call for fair rules of the road, you know, to set terms. And we also set forth a proposal to deliver real enforcement, because that's key. Without enforcement, you might as well not have any laws on the books at all. But to go into a little bit more detail, the antitrust proposals that we put forth, we suggest not only putting a moratorium on mergers in the agriculture sector, but to permanently cap concentration levels in particular agricultural sectors. Now, not all agricultural sectors and markets are alike. So it's really crucial that the task force, which is much like the one that is included in the legislation that was reintroduced yesterday, the task force created by congressional legislation would study these markets and determine the appropriate caps for each market. Concentration caps have been done before in the banking industry, and we firmly believe here that it could work for the agriculture sector. But in addition to just stopping concentration permanently, we propose unwinding mergers and acquisitions that had anti-competitive effects. We also propose strict structural presumptions against mergers. So as I'm sure some of you all are familiar with, over the last 40 years, antitrust law, which had previously been predicated on really strong, like, bright line rules based on concentration levels against mergers, have been overturned in favor of what's known as the consumer welfare standard, which is quite subjective and tends to only focus on the end result for the consumer without regard to the rest of the supply chain and its impact on workers and farmers and small businesses and other intermediaries. So returning to strict structural presumptions and bright lines would further protect competition in the agricultural sector. Finally, on this antitrust piece, we propose adding an additional structural presumption against mergers that would result in power buyers in captive draw areas. Because currently, we think the FTC and the DOJ have very misguided notions of what the appropriate geographic market is for a lot of agricultural commodities, because they don't realize how expensive it is to ship live hogs for 400 miles and the impact that has on the farmer's bottom line. Secondly, we talk about guaranteeing a fair share for farmers by empowering them to negotiate for better prices. Farmers have a really long, rich history of bargaining cooperatives. In addition to providing more resources and grants to existing bargaining cooperatives where they work, we propose establishing in particular markets pricing boards based off of wage boards that have already been piloted successfully in New York State for fast food workers. So these boards would be made up of representatives of farmers, farm workers, and businesses, and would be moderated by either the USDA or our proposed Independent Farmer Protection Bureau. And so this pricing board would allow farmers to have an equal voice at the table as business and could negotiate prices that promise you a fair return on your investment and a fair share in the fruit of your labor by setting like minimum pricing standards. And one way that we propose doing that is using a mechanism that would guarantee a proportion of the downstream wholesale or retail price, so that you know that if you sell a hog to JBS, that you're getting at least 25, 30, 70%, maybe one day, of the price of the bacon that they sell. So that you know that you actually have like a slice of the pie waiting for you. Furthermore, we ban these spot market prices in contract formulas if these markets are compromised, because right now contracting, particularly in hogs, they're based on the prices in the contracts are based on formulas that use futures or spot market prices in markets that aren't fair or transparent or competitive at all, which gives rise to the possibility of manipulation and suppressed prices. And then contract reform is the third part. You all are all intimately familiar with that because of the fight over the Farmer Fair Practices rules for the last at least 20 years, but the last 10 years especially. That's on the next slide. Oh yes, got it. Perfect, thank you. So we press for the immediate passage of the Farmer Fair Practices rules by statute, because we know that currently those rules aren't going to be promulgated under the USDA as it stands today. So we demand that Congress takes action and passes it as legislation to guarantee that farmers are protected from unfair contract practices. Finally, the Independent Farmer Protection Bureau is our solution to the problem of enforcement. The USDA has been subject to a lot of industry capture in addition to structural racism. In fact, folks at OCM, you released a report a few years ago called USDA Inc., that laid out all of the ways in which the revolving door between industry and the USDA has compromised its ability to really serve farmers. So what we propose is the creation of an independent agency with its own funding source, separate from the USDA, called the Independent Farmer Protection Bureau. It would be modeled after the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau in that it would have a 5-year presidential appointee subject to Senate confirmation and have its own dedicated funding stream, paid for in part by a fee on the largest agribusiness monopolies. So the IFPB would implement and enforce the 3 other policies that we have outlined previously. They would help certify and oversee the pricing boards. They would monitor spot markets to ensure that they're functioning competitively, and where they aren't, they would flag it as compromised so that integrators can't use those spot markets to inform prices in their contracts. And they would collect data, pricing data, make it public, and they would also have backstop authority to block or review mergers and acquisitions that impact farmers. So that's everything from your inputs, your seeds, to the actual dinner plate or the grocery store. It would also have certain regulatory rulemaking powers that would protect farmers from unfair practices, like laws restricting farmers' right to repair their equipment, for example. That more or less sums up our vision. We have it in a little bit more detail in our most recent paper, but to summarize, we propose that not only is it time to rein in agribusiness, but make sure that farmers have a voice at the table. And we're calling for fair rules of the road and meaningful enforcement through the creation of an IFPB that would ensure that farmers have a voice fighting for them in Washington.
Well, Zoe and Abril, thank you so much for this super informative presentation. What I will do now is unmute everyone and open the conversation up for questions. There you go. So if you have a question, feel free to just throw it out. Hopefully it'll work that way.
So I actually see one in the chat box. David asked about census data. So how many black farmers are there? I don't think we have the exact number of black farmers.
The absolute number?
Yes.
Yeah. So in our paper, we talk about farmers as a percent of, we talk about black farmers as a percent of farmers as a whole. Mm-hmm. I think it's something around 250,000 black farmers, to my recollection. And in terms of Native farmers, Hispanic farmers, and Asian American farmers, that's all included in the USDA Census of Agriculture that was released, I guess 6 weeks ago now, something like that. Mm-hmm. They have really handy charts that tabulate all of that demographic info. And we can actually follow up in an email thread and pass along those data points for you if you're interested. Yes. So David Beck asked, what does the heirs property provision in the 2018 Farm Bill do? Okay, that's a really good question. And I'm glad we got a chance to circle back to this because I think it really is a big deal, and it was a huge win that was championed by the Congressional Black Caucus. So basically what it what the provision did is it allowed heirs farms that are on heirs property to receive a farm number, which is what you need to apply for certain government loans and crop insurance. Previously, if your farm didn't have a deed or a title because it was heirs property, you had no way of accessing the same USDA services as farms that did have that formal land ownership document. Does that answer your question, David? David Beck, sorry. We've got two Davids on the call. Great. Oh, have we looked into, David asks, have we all looked at oversight of USDA guaranteed lenders? And we haven't yet, but it's something that we might explore in the future. The economic policy team does a lot of home ownership and financial protection work as well. So it might be a great follow-up study to do.
And I'll circle back to the first David question about, what about the native farmers, the Hispanic farmers, right? So the census has been around for hundreds of years, but they did not do a good job of capturing data if you weren't white or black. So the reason why we are able to make this case about black farmers is because there is documented instances of racism, of bad lending practices, and of the just overall decrease overall. Like, I don't even think Asian Americans were included in the census as recently as like the 60s, right? So that's why our report focused on black farmers specifically, but we do understand that there are other issues faced by Native American farmers, Hispanic farmers, Asian American farmers, etc. So just wanted to add that caveat.
That's a really good point. Thanks for clarifying.
Does anyone who's on a phone have a question?
This is Vaughn Meyer. Yes, I do. I'm not sure how you put it in without being on the phone, but anyway, I'll get with it here one of these times and learn everything. But my question would be on this Independent Farmer Protection Bureau. Could you go over just how that would work? Is that basically, would they just set the market standard for that day, or will they police it also on that, or will, if they see that there's some unfair practices there, are they going to be able to police it from that standpoint?
Yes, that's a really good question. So we spend the most time detailing its power to monitor and collect data to ensure that markets are functioning competitively. In the case that they find that they are not, they will flag that market as compromised, so that farmers know that they can't rely on that pricing data, and then they'll have the authority to do an investigation and enforce the Packers and Stockyards Act and any other antitrust laws that were violated in that market. And if they find evidence of monopoly power, they could pursue breaking up some of the buyers in that market.
So they would have the power themselves, or when they find something that's out of order, they'd go to the Justice Department then, basically?
Yeah. So for enforcing the Packers and Stockyards Act, they would absolutely have the bottom line authority. And I think we're still. I think if you don't have a question, could you please make sure that you are on mute so that I can hear the question asker, please? So in some cases, it will get kicked back to the DOJ, but our intention and the way that we're designing the ICD is to give it as much of its own authority and power as possible, because we're hoping that it won't have the same capture issues as other departments. In fact, Public Citizen just published a wonderful report today outlining the revolving door issues there. The Federal Trade Commission 70% of their top officials have revolving door conflicts of interest with the companies that they're supposed to regulate. So what we want to do is give the ICB as much authority as we can under existing statutes.
And I think I see two more questions. The documentation in the USDA left what happens with farmers obtained via discovery.
Okay. So David Willingham asks about whether the documentation in the USDA lawsuits on behalf of Black farmers were made publicly available.
Are you referencing the Pigford lawsuit? Because if you are, I can go into that. So the Pigford lawsuit happened when a whole bunch of farmers sued the USDA because between the years 1983 and I think 94, the Office of Civil Rights within USDA was closed. Under the 1982 appropriations bill, the funding was cut, so there was an avenue for people to put civil rights complaints against local USDA office denying them loans, not processing their applications, but that office wasn't funded and was in essence non-existent. During that time, there was a precipitated decrease in Black farmers, and there was a series of lawsuits. There was Pigford 1, Pigford 2, but because the Office of Civil Rights weren't open, the Black farmers who put in complaints during that time were eligible for civil rights payments because their civil rights were violated. They were trying to complain about civil rights violations that affected their ability to build wealth, but there was no office there to process those claims. So that was the Pigford claimants. In terms of the U.S., if they were obtained via discovery, so the only people who were eligible during that time were those who had submitted complaints to the Office of Civil Rights within USDA about racist treatment at their local offices. So people who didn't put in those complaints were not eligible for the Pigford payments. So I hope that answers your question.
Do you have any other questions?
This is David Beck. Sorry, I thought it was easier to type them in. But I'm curious on the guaranteed lenders. What in working with particularly Scott Marlowe at RAFI, one of the things is supposedly the guaranteed lender status should require does require socially disadvantaged farmer outreach programs, which USDA doesn't hold their feet to the fire on, the lender's feet to the fire. And so the question is, then, shouldn't that affect someone's guaranteed lender status? That basically USDA has been looking at guaranteed lender status as a safety and soundness issue, but not a sort of community outreach issue, which is also part of it. So, and maybe you mentioned maybe that's for future study, but that's sort of the issue to get at that I was trying to get at.
Yeah. Well, thank you. That's interesting background. I've talked to Scott Marlowe too. He's doing some fantastic work down there at RAFI, and yeah, I'd love to touch base and see what kind of like follow-up research we want to do, because farm policy is something that we at CAP feel is woefully neglected by other organizations of our kind. A lot of think tanks don't wade into the issue. And so we'd really like to expand our work in this area. Of course, like maintaining really close relationship with, with our allies like you all at OCM.
We're on this. One more question. Sorry. Have y'all? Did your research look into the farm credit associations much, or was it really just focused on USDA?
For the purpose of our report, just to keep the scope manageable, we really just focused on the USDA.
Thank you.
Any last questions?
Do you have a comment? Okay. Oh, thank you, David Beck.
Well, thank you so much, Zoe and Abril, for your presentation and this great follow-up discussion. We hope to be able to keep on collaborating with CAP and have you on next year for some follow-up about some new research.
Yeah,
Thank
great.
you.
Thank you so much for having us.
And thanks everyone for joining. Bye.
Hello? Hello? Hello?